this is something I struggle with at the beginning of every job, but it's to be forgiving and patient to the fact that it's a process. Just knowing that it's going to be all right. Just to let the process happen, to trust that the work is there, right, and that you don't have to angst over it as much as I sometimes do in those first moments of letting it loose and committing it to camera and have it be done. You know, you're doing stuff that is done. You only have, and especially in a TV show, you have a tight amount of takes, right, in which to give everything you possibly can of the best version of your vision, the directors, the writers, and all the kind of collaboratives that are feeding into what you're doing. So it is right to be nervous. It's an environment and a working kind of environment that creates that anxiety. But just relax a bit more, Benedict. That's what I say to myself.
So before we talk about Eric, I did want to ask each of you to share, since this is a room filled with actors, your most formative creative experience as a young person that informed your desire to be an actor. And since you're sitting next to me, I'll start with you.
Repeat the question. The most...
Your most
I was just I'm in a room with my tribe. Hello, people.
Did you forget you had to answer? Yes.
No, I just stopped listening. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Happy
it's
to
okay.
be in a room full of actors.
I'm a very intriguing person. I know. And it's very distracting.
It's not you.
Your most formative creative experience
right.
as a young person that
right.
inspired you to want to act, because not everyone becomes an actor. Some people,
both my
painters,
parents are actors,
musicians.
so I got a kind of bevy of them. And I don't really do favourites. I guess one abiding memory I have is a generalised feeling of watching my mum backstage by the flats of a bit of scenery, and just she was my mum and sort of saying hello to people backstage, and then sort of checking herself and preening a bit, and then opening a door, and then just this blast of heat and audience and light, and just my mum wasn't there anymore. I was like, what just happened? What was that about?
Like magic, probably.
Yeah, just that sort of very instant kind of pour on water transformation. And I thought, that's interesting. Another one was
how old were you at
standing,
that phase?
I don't know. Okay. I don't like to say, but I don't want to get my parents into trouble. I was probably too young. But I remember also standing on a dark stage at the RSC, the Royal Shakespeare Company, where my godmother was working. And I can't remember what production I saw, if any. And maybe I was just visiting her between shows, and she thought, I'm showing my godson, what it's like backstage. And I just immediately broke free of all the kind of backstage paraphernalia and just stood on the edge of the apron and just looked out into the black fearlessly. And they were like, oh shit. Oh dear, he might not know anything but this. But I did, and I tried to do anything but acting for a long time. But I kept on circling back.
It's a familiar story. Well, we're glad you kept with it.
Thank you. Me too.
And Gaby, I feel like maybe a lot of us in the room feel like we sort of watched you grow up a little bit. Now, it's easy to assume that those early movies in which you appeared were your earliest formative experiences, but maybe those weren't. Maybe your formative experiences came later. I don't want to make any assumptions.
Yeah, I had no interest in acting when I was a child. And I feel like I'm just sort of discovering what it's all about these days.
Now that you're choosing and you have more control and you're sort of you have power over your career.
Yeah, I came back to it around 30 after a decade plus of not doing it at all or not doing it consciously. And I sort of turned toward it with an open heart and a lot of curiosity, and discovered that it was an incredible exploration of the human experience, and that I get to keep doing that is such a privilege. And yeah, it's sort of an ongoing process of realizing that I like this and that I'm finally able to sort of feel like it has value in the world. I can feel that very easily looking at other people and taking in art of all forms. But I think it took me a long time to feel like, it took me a long time to allow myself to do it rather than go do something that, was good for humanity.
Oh, we're so glad you stuck with it.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here. And McKinley, how about you? Growing up in Atlanta, who were your influences or what inspired you as a young person?
I came to acting really late. So like anything I say about me being a kid is not gonna have anything to do with that. But I play the sax, and so that's sort of my first sort of creative experience. And I remember the very first album my dad gave me was Miles Davis' "Kind of Blue."
Wow.
And to
That's
this
a good one.
That's my favorite jazz album to this day. Of course. And in terms of the acting thing, I found it quite late. And I remember in the same year, I was going to go to law school, and so I was studying communication studies and political science. Okay. And my mom sent me a DVD of the movie Antoine Fisher, and it was the first time I watched something, and I was like, not I could do something like that, or that's familiar to me. For some reason, having never acted, I was watching it, and I was like, I could do that. And it was the performance that Derek Luke was sort of playing in.
And that was his breakout role.
It was, yeah. And in that same year, a friend wrote me into doing a production of Raisin in the Sun. And it wasn't necessarily while I was on stage. It was while my character was off stage, and I was sort of staring through the flats. And I could see the actor playing Walter Lee and the audience. And then I was having my own experience backstage, and there was something very magic to me about it, that they were enraptured with this thing, that I could feel his voice vibrating the panels. And then I was nervous about to come on stage, and there was something about all of that happening and then sort of crossing the threshold it made me feel alive, and alive in a way that I had never felt before. And those were the first times that I thought about, like, oh, maybe I want to be an actor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's give some applause for those stories. Those are so beautiful. And it makes sense because the work that you've done together in this show reflects this magic that you've created here. Benedict, what most intrigued you about the premise of Eric, specifically also playing the role of Vincent? This isn't an easy guy in which to crawl into his skin.
No, I think the allure is how novel the form of storytelling is, and what the devices are to understand this character on his journey into a dark night of the soul. The sort of slightly schizophrenic technical task of imagining yourself outside of yourself, manifesting as a 7-foot-tall walk-around monster puppet, as well as a man who's a functioning alcoholic on the threshold of crisis, with a marriage that's collapsing, with a job that's really imbued with any kind of attempt to salvage some kind of positive remembering of a very negative, loveless, uncaring childhood. And just all of that being under threat, and being so self-involved that he lashes out in defense, in anger, in fear, and all of the toxic manifestations that fear can produce. And Abby Morgan. I mean, her name.
And Abby is in the room tonight. Abby, can we give you some applause?
Yeah.
Where are you? It's so dark. Creator Abby Morgan, amazing work. Wherever you are, I can't see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, you don't need more than those two words to listen. And I went into the room to meet her and Lucy. Lucy, I mean, I watched the first episode. Lucy Forbes, the director. I watched the first episode of This Is Gonna Hurt and went, who the hell directed this? So she'd been on the list since I saw that. So that combination. But in the first meeting, it was Abby pitching the rest of the script, of which there were 3 of the 6 at the time, as to what Vincent's story arc was going to be. And I was so intrigued. And then I had a lot of questions.
Most good actors have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said yes, because really this is excellent work, really tough work, I imagine, into this. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Gaby, what aspects of Cassie felt familiar to you or knowing to you, and what aspects of her felt like new territory that you hadn't had a chance to explore as an actor?
I was drawn to Cassie for both of those reasons, actually. There was something about her that felt incredibly familiar and that I had so much compassion and empathy for. And then, of course, thankfully, I've never experienced anything like what she goes through here. And having to reach down and kind of expand into spaces that hopefully I'll never have to. For some reason, as hard as it sounds, felt incredibly compelling, and sort of, to me, this show is really exploring a crisis that we're all experiencing in very real ways. And today and for the past 40 years since the 80s when it takes place, which is that we are kind of victims of a failing society, in my experience, and the institutions that are meant to hold us and to protect us and to nurture us are corrupted and are failing us. And big and small, marriages, family, city halls, police departments, corrupted by all the forces that the show explores. And that Cassie is sort of, very literally what happens when those institutions fail us is our children get lost, or even worse, killed. But metaphorically, we are all lost, I think, and we are all suffering for it. And so exploring that in such an intimate and personal way, and facing real darkness and having to move through that into the light feels like the journey that we're all on as people. And so I think that's what drew me to want to play her. It's the work I try to do in my own life. And so to get to do it with such, first of all, beautiful writing and such strong storytelling, and in such a different way, thank God, than I do it in my own life, I think felt incredibly like a privilege.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. McKinley, Abby, your fearless leader, Abby Morgan, has said that you, quote, have a great poker face as an actor, which I thought was a wonderful compliment. But I wanted to know what you think she means by that in the sense of you playing this character who is essentially living a double life, because he really has a public face and a private face. But I want to know what you think, first of all, she means by that. Maybe you have an inscrutability to your work. And I understand what she means, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a cool compliment, I guess.
Very cool compliment.
I think when I think about LaDroit, there is a lot of things that he has to constantly bury, both in terms of self-preservation, and there's a compartmentalization that's required because queerness in the 80s in the police department is just not only not accepted, but not a safe thing to be disclosing to people. And I think because he's dealing with such a huge thing at home in the sense of not only having a partner who, like, he's built a whole life inside those walls, but who is like deteriorating in front of him, as well as sort of sitting right in the middle of an AIDS crisis. And there's nowhere that is safe for him to share what he is feeling, what he's experiencing, and what he's thinking about any of that. So every time he steps outside of the apartment, he has to bury it. And I think that becomes a thing that he's very practiced at, is burying what he's feeling, burying what he's afraid of, burying the many balls that he has to keep in the air, juggling in terms of both being a black man, being a queer man, and sometimes those things even being weaponized and leveraged against him over the course of the story. So when I hear that compliment, I do hear it as a compliment because it means that I'm doing something, I hope, that LaDroit will be very practiced at, and is a sort of symptom of a weight that he's carrying from the day to day.
And he also can't reveal to the people he's questioning. He has to sort of be playing the game in order to get people to talk, too.
That's a whole another level to it, because, like, there's so much about my journey with, like, doing scenes with all of these people and people who aren't here right now that is about a sort of focused observation. And to not be able to maintain the poker face would mean as soon as you see something, you're letting on that you're seeing and taking it in. And the whole point is to take in the information so that it can be useful later. And if it's constantly being reflected on your face, then it isn't as useful.
That does make sense. Thank you so much. That's very interesting. And the show within the show here, Good Day Sunshine, is obviously inspired by Sesame Street and other classic children's programs. And Benedict, in preparing and researching for this role, what did you learn about this particular art form that was striking to you? And what do you think it says that Vincent has chosen this as his career?
I forget the name of the documentary, but it's an amazing view into the puppet world, the Frank Oz and
Jim Henson.
Thank you. Yeah, the god.
That one guy.
Don't forget his name. Yeah. We were very careful to be a continuation of where that begins as early childhood literacy and numeracy, but the thought, the sort of far-reaching educational daring, the societal inclusion of that show, how to reach inner city kids in a way that spoke to them and educated them and helped them, and the struggles that certain parents had in those situations was sort of societally, culturally very significant. And it, reached our shores. I mean, it was something I was very aware of, enjoyed a lot as a kid, as I did the Muppets and the continuing spin-offs of that whole era and the brilliance of Henson and Oz. But to learn about how they began and their sort of maverick creative spirit, how they ran against the grain and dared to do pretty racy stuff with adverts, which is how they kind of first came to the public conscience before, forming this incredible sort of era-defining show, was a clue into what mine and Lenny's relationship might have been like in the early days, the joy of that collaboration and that early fever of creativity. And important to understand that in all the previous circumstances before you meet this character on the cliff edge of disaster. And what did I learn? I mean, everything that, as someone who knows nothing about that world.
I mean, I was amazed just to see the mechanics. I didn't realize how much these people's arms must have hurt.
Yeah.
How much did your arms hurt?
Quite a bit. Yeah. I'm not.
It's incredible.
It's not nothing compared to the real deal. And we had masters in that form teach us and be part of the crew, both in operating Eric. I mean, Ollie, who's inside that, is an exceptional actor as well as an extraordinary puppeteer, and it felt that it really was a real presence on set. And I had a performer to play off. It wasn't just somebody who was moving the sort of exterior shell that I was then going to inhabit with my voice. He was a great collaborator and contributor. So that was a gift for nothing, as was the continuing journey of self-discovery and skill acquisition that the privilege of my job gives all of us. It's fantastic to learn in your late 40s how to operate a puppet. It's a lot of fun and very helpful.
Kids, any kids who know you are excited.
Exactly. It's fun. And it became quite obsessional.
And what do you think it says about Vincent, that out of all the things he could do in his life, that he's chosen this as his job?
It says that, as Lenny says, they say the thing, well, it's later on, you haven't seen the episode yet, but, what is it about puppets is the thing that Cassie asks, and his retort is, they say the things that we can't. It's a mask, it's a freedom within that. It's an external way to be and express that can free something that is otherwise stuck in us. And there's aspects of clowning, but there's also for Vincent a very specific aspect of reinventing, as I said before, this pretty traumatic childhood. Again, this is very early on in your viewing experience to understand.
I'm trying to be cagey about it.
Well,
no, you're doing great.
It's it comes up. It definitely comes up. But it's why, because his behavior is sort of, it's hard to stomach in that first episode without the context that then reveals itself. It's a slow burn and a slow learn for him. You don't get to see it all until quite later on in the show. But yeah, did I answer your question?
You sure did. Wonderfully.
Okay, good.
Gaby, one of the many amazing aspects of the show is that it was largely shot in Budapest. Who would have thought? Amazing movie magic. And as someone who grew up in New York during this time period, what emotions did you feel seeing this world essentially be recreated at a time when you yourself were a child, and to have it be somewhere else, but it's New York? And how did it sort of inform your emotional resonance during your scenes?
Well, I grew up in New York in the 80s, surrounded by Hungarians.
An even stranger layer.
Yeah. A wonderful group of families had a theater company called the Squat Theater, and they left Budapest in 1979 and ended up squatting in a building on the street I grew up on. 23rd Street, which
That
is not far at all from where the Andersons live in this story. So oddly, being in Budapest, surrounded by Hungarian, but being in New York felt just right. And there is something about Budapest. It's a beautiful city. It has a sort of faded, or somebody referred to it as a chipped glory that was reminiscent to me of the New York in the 80s that was not as shiny as the New York of today. Budapest also has a heaviness. They've experienced quite a lot of trauma fairly recently, and still very much held by the city and the population. And you can feel it walking around. I felt it a lot more than I expected. And it was also January when we got there. So
it looked a little cold.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, as much as I would hope and pray that the population of that country had a different past, it did kind of set the stage emotionally, just walking down the street for where we were, and was reminiscent of New York in the 80s, which also had a sort of dark heaviness to it. And then, but then walking onto the set the first time into our apartment on a sound stage in the suburbs of Budapest, I actually started to cry because it felt so familiar. And even though it was a much nicer apartment than the one I grew up in, there was really something about the sort of the gestalt of what was created that brought me right back to my childhood. And it was really moving. So yeah, I had no problem feeling like I was in New York City in the 80s.
That's amazing. What an incredible coincidence. And McKinley, you are now a very prolific theater actor. Even though you claim to have come to acting later, you have done quite a bit of work. And is it true you were doing Death of a Salesman when you found out that you'd gotten this role? That's pretty great. Pretty great. I always like to ask people who've done a lot of theater, what are your biggest adjustments that you make to your work in shooting something for the screen? Because I know it's a very different art form. It takes a while to get comfortable with the way a series is filmed. But tell me, what has been your biggest learning curve?
I like this question. I think of theater as like a grand act of generosity. Like it requires a generosity of spirit, both vocally, with your time, with your body, and there's a great responsibility to not only have a truthful experience and use that in storytelling, but to also give it to an audience. And when I'm doing a thing on camera, it's as if one of those responsibilities has been removed. I'm only charged with having a truthful experience. It's someone else's job to give it to an audience or to capture it and sort of cut it together. And it's in much shorter chunks.
Does it feel like less pressure in a sense?
In some ways, it feels like a more focused experience of like having a truthful experience with like a page or two, or at most we put a bunch of scenes together and it was like maybe 8 pages or 7 pages. Yeah. But it's not like a 90-page, 80-page script, a story from beginning to end. There's something that I love about the theater that is communal and almost spiritual. And but there's also something about when I'm on stage that there's an awareness to like people and bodies that is different. When I'm on camera, I find myself getting it's a little easier to get lost because it's for a shorter period of time, and I don't have to be aware of falling off the edge of a stage or running into something. I think that the thing that the theater has prepared me the most with is just how to deal with text. When you're working with Shakespeare, or even some of the classic American playwrights or a new playwright, it teaches you how to unpack and mine a scene for everything that can be or could be. And I find when I come to the things on camera that I think a lot about options and possibilities, so that when I get on set, I can just sort of be and explore and play without having to think so much.
When you think about the experience of making this series, what lessons or memories have most stuck with you as being something that you're treasuring as an actor? Maybe start with Benedict.
I think this is something I struggle with at the beginning of every job, but it's to be forgiving and patient to the fact that it's a process, that you're not expected. Well, it's the people pleasing thing. It's the super ego thing, isn't it? Like, you've done all the work, you've done all the prep. It's the first day of shooting. You've got to turn up and show that you turn up, and that kind of, I'm all here. The character's all here, and yes, it should all be there, but it doesn't have to be on display. And I think there's I have an issue with kind of trying to prove something to myself, not necessarily to other people, but just to sort of feel secure. It's a very natural thing. You're stepping out into it for the first time. It's a very obvious insecurity.
Like not leaving enough cushion for discovery when you get to to set.
Just knowing that it's going to be all right. Just to let the process happen. To trust that the work is there,
right,
and that you don't have to angst over it as much as I sometimes do in those first moments of letting it loose and committing it to camera and have it be done. You know, you're doing stuff that is done, right, and that for me is a definitive difference between the theatre. The theatre, you get to tackle the ghosts every time. You get to evolve every time you go through that complete arc. Whereas with film, you only have, and especially in a TV show, you have a tight amount of takes, right, in which to give everything you possibly can of the best version of your vision, the directors, the writers, and all the kind of collaboratives that are feeding into what you're doing. So it is right to be nervous. It's an environment and a working kind of environment that creates that anxiety, but just relax a bit more, Benedict. That's what I say to myself, my youngest.
Everyone tell yourself, just relax, Benedict. Every time you get to set, just say exactly that. Gaby, what have you taken with you in this phase of your career, which you're hopefully enjoying now more?
I was listening so intently to Benedict that I forgot to think about it.
I forgot the question.
What have you taken with you as an actor that
I have that effect on people? But I top some list. If you want to go to sleep tonight, just listen to me reading an audiobook. I think
you do have a very calming voice, I must say.
Sorry.
Just something that you've taken with you as a lesson, or something that you're treasuring from this experience as an actor that you're taking with you to your next job, or have already taken with you.
You want time to think?
You can go first if you need to.
No, I don't know. I think there's a pressure as an actor to make yourself like everyone else, and there's a part of that that feels a little bit human to me. Is that it's normal to want to sort of blend in and to be part of what's happening around you, but there is something really beautiful about individuality and uniqueness, and someone sort of stepping fully into themselves. And there's something about my journey on this show with LaDroit that over the 6 episodes, it's for me about him stepping fully into his power and embracing and loving himself fully. And I think that's something that I can take into life because as actors, I think there are people who are going to be more beautiful than you, who are more talented than you, who can handle text better than you, who can remember pages faster than you, but no one can do you the way you do. No one has the life experience that you have, that you hear the music in this way, or the music, the way your instrument is made, it comes out of you in a very special way, and that's like your superpower. And as for actors and for artists generally, I think it's just really important to lean into those things that make you really special, not run away from them.
I love that. That is so wonderful. No pressure, Gaby. Now
I'm just responding to what McKinley said. I just heard somebody talk about this in such a beautiful way. That, in fact, that the instrument, picture a flute, and that we each have a flute running through us that is filled with the holes of our life experience, and that flute only belongs to each of us because our life experience is so unique. And so when you let air move through it, when you inspire, when you let yourself be inspired, you are making this one unique sound that is the makeup of who you are and the life you've lived. And nobody else can make that sound. And all you have to do is learn how to do that and have faith and trust in that. And that is your one job in life as an artist. So I like thinking about the instrument as a flute, which, I could say more about the flute, but I won't.
That was so wonderful. I wish we had more time, but we're so grateful that you were able to be here tonight. Congratulations on the show. And don't forget to watch it May 30th. Is that right, Netflix, folks? May 30th. All 6 episodes will be available. Please enjoy and be safe. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
you all for
Thank
coming.
you
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Thank you.